Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's first seminar, webinar. Sorry, I can always keep them seminars. I don't have to remind myself it's a webinar. Our first webinar on Italy, and this is all about how to move to Italy, how to project manage your Italian purchase. And my name is Christopher Nye. I'm the editor at Property Guides. The website propertyguides.com, and we have guides to buying in all your favorite countries. But I have to say, our Italy website is the best. We have some fantastic writers, especially a lady in Puglia who is so dedicated and knows everything about moving to Italy. So we have some fantastic articles at Property Guides. As a business, we've been helping customers to buy abroad safely for over 10 years now, well over 10 years, in fact. We provide resources, guides, newsletters, news updates, legal help, everything to connect you, plus to connect you directly with the trusted experts like Daniel, who we're going to speak to in a minute. All the trusted experts to support you with your purchase and your move to Italy. If you're going to, whether you're going to buy a holiday home or a retirement house, a forever home. It's great to see so many of you here today. It's quite early in the UK, but I know that we get people from all over the world. So if it's extremely late or extremely early where you are, I know we get people in New Zealand and the States. So thank you for joining us, and we hope we can be of some help. We're sorry, obviously, that we can't meet you in person, but I have to say, I think there is very much a light at the end of the tunnel, and we hope to be able to travel to Italy by the summer, and to meet you in person. For this session, which will last 45 minutes, I am joined by Daniel Shillito, who is going to give us his top tips for buying in Italy. Daniel is co-founder and creator of D&G Property Advice, and he's based in Milan full-time. Lucky Daniel. D&G Property Advice isn't an estate agent, but they do specialize in preparing you for your home purchase in Italy. Then they treat buying like a project that needs to be managed. Daniel is also a qualified financial advisor and is registered with the Italian Financial Services Regulator. Before I hand over to Daniel, I also want to make you aware that there is a chance to ask your questions to him after the presentation. So please type in your questions in the box at the bottom of the window, and I will put these to Daniel after he's spoken. We hope to answer as many queries as we can today, but if we don't get around to them all, please don't worry. Daniel and his team will be available after the session at their booth in the exhibition hall. I don't know if you've had a look around the virtual system. I think it's really good fun, and I hope it works for you. But don't forget, you can always just come back to your overseas home website after today, and you can look at all the presentations again. So feel free to take notes, obviously, but you can always come back and watch them again, or contact Daniel or me directly. So enough from me. I am now going to hand over to Daniel.
Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate that. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Daniel Shillito. We started D&G Property Advice here in Italy around 4 or 5 years ago, when we realized that the purchase process needed some assistance on the ground, especially for foreign buyers. The Italian purchase experience can be a lengthy one, can be quite complex. And we believe that if you approach it like a project and you project manage it, then you'll be able to achieve your successful purchase more effectively and more efficiently. So as you can tell, I'm not Italian. I'm an expat myself. We've been living here for 10 years, but my wife, however, is Italian, and we have Italian family, and our children go to Italian schools. So we appreciate and understand the system very well, but clearly I understand how it works as an expat. I've lived, in fact, in 5 different countries as an expat. So today we've got our booth over in the exhibition hall, as you may already be aware. So I encourage you after this to go along to our booth. And in the booth, I've got a slide just summarizing what we've got there, summarizing. We've got a couple of videos that introduce D&G property, what's it all about. And also there's a longer video of around half an hour about moving to Italy, which I prepared once before in January. We've also got a services brochure in there. Excuse me. We've got more information about how you can obtain a mortgage in Italy and a mortgage inquiry form. There's also an Italian purchase flowchart to give you a diagrammatic summary of the purchase process and tips about how to buy in Italy. We're offering today that if you come along to the booth and talk to Giovanni and I, if you ask a question, then we'll send you the latest ebook that we've created just a couple of months ago about how to buy successfully in Italy. Okay, today, now anyone that's heard me present before, they'll realize that I try to pack a lot of information in as short amount of time as possible. And we haven't got a lot of time today. I could probably speak about these subjects all day, but as it stands, I think I've got around about 20 minutes and then we can open it up for your questions. And if the questions don't get answered here for some reason, please come along to the booth where you can ask the question directly from us there. So we're going to cover property buying tips and the property purchase process, first of all. I'm then going to talk about taxes in Italy and how they're affected by your residency. In other words, Italian residency, and your other finances. We're then going to talk about mortgages in Italy and how you go about the mortgage process. We'll then talk for a little while about visas and immigration, which is clearly important, particularly post-Brexit for British citizens, and a little bit about health and health insurance in Italy. Okay, so the home buying process, just to give you an overall feel for it, if you're not familiar, there's essentially three contracts that are worked through the Italian purchase process. There's an offer at the beginning, which is a short form contract, which contains the general terms and conditions of any negotiation. Then there's the preliminary contract, or preliminare, or compromesso is sometimes called, which is where essentially you are legally committed to purchase the property and the seller's committed to sell the property. So any breaches of conditions there and breaches of that contract may lead to penalties or forced conclusion of the contract if you don't complete. So your deposits, etc., are at risk at that time. And then the third contract in the Italian purchase process is at the closing itself, called the rogito, which is the longest contract. It's actually created just for the day of transferring title, paying over your final balance of the purchase property due. Now, the purchase timeline, I like to highlight this because a lot of people may get their expectations, may have their expectations missed, or they may not realize what's involved when they first start the negotiating process and you found a property. But the average purchase process does take 9 months. The Bank of Italy have indicated that on their website. Now, you won't find it on the front page of the Bank of Italy website, so don't go looking there, but deep within their notes in one of the pages there, we found it. It actually says this is what they expect a residential property purchase process to take. Now, 9 months is a long time, and that's one of the reasons why D&G Property Advice is here, to try and shorten that time frame for you and make it more effective or efficient. So here's just a brief summary of the steps and the processes that might make up that 9-month period. So in the initial phases of a purchase, you're obviously looking to find the property. You want to evaluate it. What is it worth? What's a reasonable way to approach the negotiation? Do I get a survey or inspection on the property? Is that actually required? Who do I get to do that? How do I compare that to the documentation that's been provided to me by the seller or the records at the local comune? You then need to employ some professional property parties in Italy, like the notary, which is required for every property transaction in Italy, the notaio, who represents the government in essence, and ensures that property title can transfer correctly and legally, and that the parties are identified correctly, that there's no anti-money laundering and those kinds of things. So that is a legal role, but it's taken by an independent person who doesn't represent formally the buyer or the seller, but is required for every property transaction in Italy. You may want to select an engineer. You also may even engage an architect at some time if you're thinking about renovating the property that you find. And the earlier the better when you're buying in Italy, so you can understand what is actually possible with the property that you're intending to buy and what's perhaps not possible in terms of renovation. You obviously have the price negotiation. We have some financial advice, administration, troubleshooting that may occur between the parties, and contract mediation. So what we attempt to do is squeeze that timeline as best as possible into a shorter period and do a lot of the work up front in establishing project timeframes, in employing the right kind of technicians and independent professionals that can do the survey and the property documentation assessment as early as possible in the process, so that we can shorten that for you in Italy. And that's how we approach property purchasing like a project. So here's some tips for you for today when you're buying property in Italy. One of the first things you need to do is understand the cultural differences when you're selling, or you're buying a property in Italy, should I say, from a seller. So in Italy, there's one example I give to people, which is that you can't necessarily assume that when a property is online or on the market and it may have been there for some time, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's urgent and that they're anxious and willing to sell in a very short period. Or the sellers in Italy can put their place on the market for various reasons, and they also can be simply putting it there to see what kind of an offer might come back. And in fact, their property may have some outstanding administration and legal work that needs to be done to get the property ready for sale, but they're not precluded from putting the property up for sale regardless. So you may find a property that appears to be ready to sell and you're ready to sell, and you put in an offer and you're expecting things to be in order, and it's quite possible that the property documentation still needs to be gotten into order, or there may be an unauthorized renovation that's taken place on the property and they still need to get approval for that. So you need to be prepared that this may be the case with the property that you find. Choosing your professionals is an important tip. You have the ability under the law to choose your own notaio, the notary that does that legal role in Italy formally. The standard approach, I guess, by a foreigner who may not have many contacts in Italy is that the agent recommends the professionals around him and within his circle that could assist with the purchase, be it a local notary or a local geometer, which is the draftsperson or surveyor that goes to inspect the property, or other professionals. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. They may be competent and available to perform their roles in the property purchase. However, we believe it's better to have an independent person who's separate from the seller, separate from the agent, who's going to act in your interests to check the structural integrity, that's from an engineer point of view, and from a notary point of view, who's going to respond to your needs and ensure that the contracts really protect you. You also can control the costs better then as well, because you can choose the notary that you want to use, and all notaries aren't priced the same around Italy. And also all notaries around Italy don't speak English to the same extent that you might require, for example. So choosing your own means that we can help you select one that does speak good English, that is reputable, that has reasonable fees as well. Third tip I've got on this slide is understanding all your fees and costs. So a quick rule of thumb for you is really around the total purchase costs when buying, and I'd suggest they're around 10 or 12% of the property price, but that won't occur for low property or cheaper properties. So if a property is only 40, 50, 60, 70, 80,000 euros, for example, that percentage will be higher, of course, because there'll be some basic services that a notary or a lawyer or an engineer may have to perform, and naturally the percentage will look much higher if it's on a smaller base, on a smaller property purchase. Completing a building survey, I've just spoken about that a minute ago. I highly recommend that you do that, and it's an independent assessment early in the process, right at the time that you're negotiating the price. It doesn't have to necessarily be completed when you put in an offer or have an offer accepted in principle, but you can make it a condition of acceptance of any offer that an inspection will be carried out, that you'll be satisfied with that survey. And we help people to make sure those things are included in any negotiation. If you do have a mortgage or you're looking to get a mortgage, it's important that you consider this in advance and that you don't negotiate, establish a price, move forward with the contract, and then come and say, okay, I'd like to get mortgage approval now, because you can't guarantee in Italy mortgage approval regardless of your financial situation, because the banks will need to look at various factors, including the specific property itself, which is very important. The banks won't necessarily take security over or lend money over all kinds of property, and in different stages of repair as well. Okay, that's my summary for you today on the property buying process. Now let's jump into taxes. So understanding taxes and finances in Italy. Let's talk about taxes quickly when you're buying property and how your residency might affect that. So if you're buying from out of country and you're not expecting to live in the property, at least not in the short or medium term, then you'll be buying as a second home in the Italian understanding, or seconda casa. And in that case, the property purchase tax is 9% of what they call the cadastral value of the home. And what's that mean? It's a bit like a council valuation. So in the UK, for example, properties are often valued for council rates purposes by local councils. And so the cadastral value is a land value essentially, and it's a much lower value than the purchase price or the market value of the property. It might be even less than half on average of the price that you might expect to pay for the property. So the tax in that case, as I said, is for a seconda casa is 9%. However, if you're planning on living in or retiring to the property, or you're already living in Italy when you buy, then that tax is 2%. And naturally that applies for Italian born and bred citizens. When they go and buy their first home, the tax is much lower. It's 2% of that cadastral value. Now, if the property happens to be a new build, there's a variation there. The tax rises to 4%. And if you happen to be buying from a company like a developer, then that tax also is 10% in that case. The first home buyer activity. So if you are intending to live in Italy, that implies that your residency is either already in place or it's pending. So in other words, you can buy, say, I'm going to move into the house or apartment, etc. And as long as you move in within 18 months, you can take advantage of the lower tax impost for a first home buyer in Italy. There's also a mortgage tax, which is something to keep in mind. For investors, it's 2%. For first home buyers, it's 0.25%. Let's look at now quickly at taxes when you're letting a property. So you may buy it and say, I'm going to holiday in it for a month or two a year, and then I want to rent it out with Airbnb or with a local agency thereafter, from an investment point of view. Now, the first thing is to realize is that investment property is not treated anything like the buy-to-let environment in the UK, or in buying investment property in the States, or in Northern Europe or Australia or anywhere else. It's very unique to Italy, and it has its unique characteristics. So I suggest you get informed before you consider buying for investment and for letting property out. So just a quick summary today. What we've got time to talk about is what are the actual tax rates. Well, it's either there's a choice that you can make within the tax regime in Italy about rental property income. Either it can be included in all of your other income when you're declared to the Italian authority your normal income. If for example, you're earning a salary or employment income in Italy and you're Italian resident, or for short-term rentals only, for example, to other holiday makers or people staying in your place only temporarily, the tax rate is 21% of the gross rental that you receive. That's a special regime for short-term rentals. Also here, I've got a note saying that if you have the ability or want to have a tenant for a long term, the contracts, typically the standard contract protected by law in Italy is 4 years plus a potential additional 4 years that a tenant could extend for. And those long-term rental contracts have a favorable tax rate because you're assisting Italians or locals that want to stay long-term in your property. Now let's talk about tax residency itself. This is a question I often get about, okay, if I buy a property, am I going to be tax resident in Italy? Or, you know, if I spend more than 6 months in a year in Italy, will I become automatically tax resident? And what does that mean for me? So here's a whistle-stop tour of tax residency in Italy. So this is by no means tax and financial advice, because that kind of advice needs to be tailored to your specific financial situation. So please take this as general advice. A lot of people talk about the 183-day rule, and that is one measure that the Italian government uses to assess tax residency, but it's not the only one. And so it's actually a trap for people to believe that as long as they stay outside of Italy for less than 183 days, then they'll never be tax resident, or they won't be a tax resident in each of those years where they are physically there for less than 183 days. In Italy, in fact, there's three different factors, three different measures that the government can use to determine if you're a tax resident or not. So the 183-day rule is just one of them. Another one is if you're simply registered at the local comune as being a local and living there locally. Now, this has happened a lot, especially last year, for British citizens who, during the transition period, registered their presence at the local comune near their home or property where they were staying. Now, essentially from that point forward, the Italian government considers that you're Italian tax resident. And that means you're a resident on your worldwide income in Italy. Okay, so from that point forward, once you're registered locally, you are taxable in the Italian government's eyes on your worldwide income. Now, of course, tax treaties exist between countries to prevent double taxation. And the idea is that you cannot be taxed on the same income twice. It doesn't mean you won't be taxed in Italy if you're being taxed elsewhere. You will be taxed in Italy, but the tax treaty facilitates a credit from one of the countries for tax that you've paid in the other country. So, for example, if you paid your tax in America on a certain kind of income, and you are tax resident and deemed to be tax resident in Italy, and the tax is assessed on that, you can get a credit for the tax that's already been paid in America on that income to be offset against your Italian tax assessment, thanks to the tax treaty between the two countries. So that's how the taxation works. And you ought to be wary as well. The third measure of tax residency is what I've got written here, as I've described it as social and economic center. In other words, regardless of whether you're registered at a local council or comune in Italy, regardless of how many days of the year you spend there, if other means like your employment or your family and your network is primarily in Italy, the Italian government can also then conclude you're not effectively resident anywhere else, but you are resident in Italy for tax purposes. Let's talk quickly about some tax concessions that are out there today, that you may have seen in the press or read about. And we've got a couple of articles on these tax concessions on our blog at dngpropertyadvice.com. So when you've got some time, I suggest you have a look there and you can read through these in more detail. But essentially, right now, the government is trying to attract new tax residents to Italy, and which will assist it, especially coming out of COVID in terms of the economic recovery. And also for returning Italians they're trying to encourage them back to the country. And to do that, here's one quite attractive tax concession, which states that for the first 5 years of your new tax resident working in Italy, that 70% of your employment income or self-employment income is exempt from tax. So you'll only pay tax on 30% of your income for 5 years. Now that increases to a 90% exemption if you're in certain sectors, and primarily if you're in research and education. And that tax concession timeframe is also extendable if you buy a property in Italy within a year of becoming tax resident, which is quite a healthy, another attractive tax concession for someone moving to Italy. Or if you have children under 18 as well, and you bring them to Italy, then that tax concession can be extended another 5 years. Then for retirees, right now there's a 7% rate of tax concession on pension income. So rather than being included in your other income and calculated according to the progressive rates of tax on income in Italy, there's a flat rate of 7% when you are eligible and receiving a foreign pension. So let's say you're receiving a pension from America, Australia, UK, and you move to Italy, they will only tax that pension income at the flat rate of 7%. And actually, this also includes any other type of foreign income that you're earning at the time. So if you've got dividends or investments that are producing income outside of Italy, the concession states that they'll also only be taxed at 7%, which is quite a discount from normal tax rates on income. And that applies if you move to a low density populated area in southern Italy. And low density, what does that mean? It means a town or a village of less than 20,000 inhabitants. And I can tell you from experience, Italy's got hundreds of those destinations, which may only be a half an hour or an hour from a bigger city or the coast or other desirable locations. So that's quite possible. Property and particularly mortgages now. We've talked about the property purchase process. Let's talk about mortgages. I get a lot of queries about mortgages in Italy. Now, our booth, again, you can find, we've uploaded a 5-page document called Can You Get a Mortgage in Italy? And it runs through the key factors that will help determine whether or not you're likely to obtain a mortgage from an Italian bank or non-bank lender. So you can download that whenever you like, and I suggest you do that. But I'll run through them quickly for you here in terms of the key facts that everybody often wants to know when they're starting out and looking to buy with a mortgage. The first one is that if you've got any kind of foreign currency income, whether you are earning in pounds or dollars or some other currency, the loan to value ratio that the banks will lend is 50%. So whatever you buy, typically 50% is the maximum. Now, if you happen to have been living in Italy and earning euros for 2 or 3 or 4 years, then like an ordinary citizen here, you'll then be entitled to a higher borrowing percentage at maybe 70% or 80%. But that's only where you're basically living and earning in euros in Italy. There are some exceptions because whilst Italy has policies around and banks have policies around when they will and won't lend, there are occasional exceptions. They can make exceptions to lend a little bit more for those cases of where clients have greater spread of assets and a higher net worth, or if and also they'll lend if you're earning in a stronger currency. So the strongest currencies are British pounds, Swiss francs, US dollars primarily. They're going to be looked upon more favorably. And unfortunately, there are not mortgages available for some other currencies, and particularly Eastern European currencies right now. That's because the banks really are following policies that are being advised to them by the European Union. There was a European Union mortgage directive that came out 2 or 3 years ago, and it encouraged banks not to lend to customers that have foreign currency incomes because of the risk that their mortgage repayments were going to rise on a regular basis and put those borrowers into financial difficulty. And hence, there are not a lot of options on the market for foreign currency income borrowers. We've got access to the ones that we know about, the only ones we know about, and so we help our clients to get access to those. Typically, the interest rates available are 1.5% to 2% variable. Loan terms typically from 10 to 20 years, but the age is important. Italian banks won't lend if the mortgage would go beyond your 75th birthday. So typically, once you approach around age 65, you can't expect to be asking a mortgage from an Italian bank. It's very likely the answer is going to be no. So qualifying for an Italian mortgage, 3 factors to remember. First one is the one I've already discussed, which is the current bank lending policy that will affect whether you can borrow or not, especially regarding foreign currencies. Meeting the loan serviceability or affordability. There's a financial hurdle here. If you meet that hurdle, we can talk about the property and likelihood for a mortgage. If you don't meet this hurdle, then you won't be able to take the mortgage application any further. And this is the hurdle. 35%. What does that mean? 35% of your net income after tax each month is the maximum that can be contributed to mortgage repayments. Okay, so whether it includes mortgage repayments on the proposed loan in Italy, plus any existing mortgage payments you've got back in your home country, or any rental payments. So you add those up, and they can't be more than 35% of your after-tax income monthly. If they are, the bank will deem that a new mortgage is not affordable for you, and you won't qualify. Finally, the banks are going to look carefully at the property that you're buying, and they won't lend against property that have been that are subject to significant unregulated building practices, for example, which they call abuso, which is that they're abusing essentially the local laws and planning requirements. This slide just shows you that we've got a number of resources when it comes to buying. So just ask us about those, and these are the cost schedules about for the purchase process that take into account all the mortgage taxes, all the advice of all the professionals, and gives you a summary of what you can expect in the purchase process. We've got a mortgage inquiry form and these brochures at our exhibition booth. Now let's jump quickly into visas and residency. I'm just going to touch on this and then health, and then we'll have a little bit of time for questions. Visas and residency. EU citizens on the right, non-EU citizens on the left. So here, EU citizens can stay longer than 3 months in Italy, that famous 90 days and 180 day rule for non-residents, if they provide this to the local comune in Italy. That is, they have health insurance, they've got a small amount of savings in the bank, and they've got a local address that they're living in Italy, and an EU citizen can therefore stay beyond 90 days. For non-EU citizens, they cannot stay at the moment in Italy for longer than 90 days in any 180-day period. So this now applies to British citizens since the end of the transition period, as much as it does and always has to Americans or Australians and non-EU applicants, or people from the Middle East or anywhere that's non-EU. What's the best approach? Start with the family history trick if you're not sure if you've got any Italian heritage whatsoever, because using the route towards having grandparents or others that have been Italian citizens is going to be much smoother and easier for you to be able to gain residency. And if in the case of one partner having citizenship, the ability or a path to citizenship or residency thanks to their family history, the spouse can normally have a permit to stay in Italy without too much administration. If that is not the case in your family, then you will need a visa to stay beyond 90 days in Italy. And there's a 3-step process essentially to residency. You first apply and get granted a visa. When you arrive in the country with that visa, you request a permit to stay. And with that permit to stay, you're expected to register at the local comune where you're living. And the types of visas available in Italy, you've got work visas, student visas, or retiree or self-funded visas and investor visas. And here's a quick summary of those types for non-EU citizens. Investor visas on the right, I'm not going to spend much time on that. If you've got a query about how you can obtain a visa through investment, let us know and we'll give you a much more detailed information. But essentially that is not, that does not include property. So buying property in Italy does not grant you any kind of residency or citizenship, but you can invest in business or listed investments to receive a visa. Aside from the investor route, the most commonly used route is the elective residence visa. So you can apply, and you need to apply at your consulate in the country where you live. You don't arrive and apply in Italy. That consulate will start the processing for you. And these are the requirements. You provide an evidence of where you're going to be staying in Italy, whether you've bought a property already, obviously then your contract of purchase is sufficient, or a rental contract. You make sure you've got health insurance for a year that covers you while you're staying in Italy, and you need to provide evidence of financial security to enable you to stay in Italy. And the most clearest obvious measure there is 31,000 euros as an individual, or 36,000 euros of income each year as a couple will provide evidence to the Italian government that you can apply for the elective residence visa. Health and health insurance. I'm just going to give you a few points here from our experience and some resources that we have in this area. So when you come to Italy, I can tell you that the public health system is generally well regarded. Nearly every Italian that I know personally has traveled abroad and compared it to other countries. They say the public system in Italy is very good. I can tell you that your doctor visits and outpatient needs at a hospital are covered by the public system. So if you have a more than very short-term visa in Italy and you're registered at the local comune, then you can be entitled to get the access to the public system in Italy. There can be wait lists when it comes to hospital procedures and operations. And of course, you can obtain private insurance if you prefer to have much greater choice to get faster treatment and choices of treatment, and the benefits of extras, of course, that we know about in our home countries. When you buy private insurance, and you can get access to additional dental cover or optical cover, etc. There are companies, and we're in contact with some, that provide specifically expat health insurance cover. That's all I think we've got time for today about moving to and living in Italy. So just to reiterate, you can get more information at our exhibition booth. If you come along, request a copy of this presentation, the slides, that is. I understand you can watch the video another day, but if you want to see the slides, I can provide them to you on a personal request basis. And also, if you ask a question within our booth, we're offering today that we'll send you our new latest ebook, which we call Buying Successfully in Italy. So that's all for me today. What about some questions, Chris?
Yep. Okay. We have some questions. Well, I've been taking notes, and we've also got some questions coming. Well, my first question actually is: so you're a project manager. What does that mean exactly? So, for example, will you get me the visa, or will you find someone who will get me the visa, or how,
Yes. Well, when it comes to visas, we work directly with a network of professionals in different areas, and in visas, it's critical to work with someone who's qualified. So we work with an immigration lawyer who has services depending on the needs of the client. So we can basically work together with them. We can brief the lawyer, and we can work together with the lawyer to help an incoming non-Italian citizen to get access to a visa. And then in terms of project management for the property purchase, that means essentially that we'll coordinate all the parties. You won't say, okay, go and see an engineer over there, go and see the agent there, go and see the notary over there. We will actually coordinate those parties and contact them on your behalf, set up the arrangement according to your needs, discuss your needs with you, keep you updated on the process of the purchase towards the settlement and closing successfully.
Okay, fantastic. I have a visa question from Lynn. For an elective visa, you mentioned that one way is to evidence an income of about 31,000 euros per annum. Does this mean you have to show that you have an income coming in to your account to that amount, or can you show evidence that you have 31,000 worth of funds in your account at the start of each year?
That's a good question. The figure is meant to be an income per year, but there is some flexibility if they look at the amount of sum you've got under investment or capital. So if you've got, a number of hundreds of thousands of euro, for example, sitting in the bank that you're going to retire on, the Italian consulate will definitely take that into account, even if they cannot see actual income of 30,000 each year.
Okay. Right, lots and lots of questions coming in.
Great.
Can I just ask a quick question on just to make a comment actually about the family history thing? Of course, you don't just have to have. You could find an Irish relative as well. I know that about at least 10% of British people have an Irish relative, and that's another way of getting a passport.
Getting an EU, yeah, exactly. Another EU citizen, exactly, has a. They can therefore take that EU route I was showing on the slide there, because once you become an EU citizen over here, then they can get residency through a more streamlined process, naturally, because the EU wants to encourage freedom of movement of European citizens.
Okay. Now, I was going to be terribly British and not mention money, but of course we have a lot of Americans viewing as well, and they want to know, how do D&G earn their fees?
Okay, so we charge a fixed fee for our project management service for buying property in Italy. We don't take a percentage of anything. So and for that, we'll work for 6 months typically on a purchase, and I'm contactable, on email, phone, and WhatsApp to help coordinate and project manage the process. And it depends on the individual as to what that particular fee is. So some people will need and want all the services and coordination, and some may say, well, actually, I've already got a cousin who's a lawyer in Italy that can do this part. I don't really need help with that part. So we don't have therefore a list fee, I guess, for every purchase. And obviously some purchases are more complicated than others. There might be a 3-story, casale, a villa in Tuscany. Another one might be a small apartment on the coast. And so it's important to make these things in perspective and be fair about them. That's why we don't charge the same fee, but we don't charge by the hour. That's another good thing to mention today, I think.
Brilliant. Okay. On the subject of money again, you mentioned price negotiation, and I just put on my notes, I put 3 exclamation marks after that. So you will negotiate with the vendor or the estate agent?
That's right. Typically,
yeah, go on.
Typically, it's the estate agent. 9 out of 10 purchasers the seller has an agent involved. And so we can approach them on your behalf and discuss the price of the property and negotiate it for you, yes. Or you can choose to do it yourself or a combination thereof. It depends on your confidence as a buyer.
Is there any element to which people see someone coming from the UK or the States and think might bump up the price a bit? Does that happen? And presumably you're in a position to knock that back a bit, to say, come on, you're trying it on a bit.
That's a good question. And I think there is an element of that. I'm going to be straightforward and say, when an Italian sees a foreign buyer come along, they can approach it slightly differently. It's not that often for them. That's one of the reasons. 95% of property transactions don't include any foreign elements in Italy. So in some areas, it's quite rare too for a foreign buyer to come along. So it's human nature to kind of think, well, if this foreign person wants my property, maybe there's something more valuable about it than I realize. So maybe I can keep my price at a different level. So I think there is an element of that, but everything is a case by case basis. In some cases, you've just got a genuine seller that wants to sell, needs to sell, and doesn't necessarily change anything at all. So it really is a case by case basis. But yeah, because we speak Italian and we operate in the Italian time zone and we understand how the agent works and their typical practices, then we can adapt to the local environment and negotiate with them according to what we think is reasonable.
And what is happening to prices at the moment? I suppose I would have expected that a global pandemic would have seen property prices go down, but the evidence is all going up all over the world. What's happening in Italy?
Well, I think Italy, if you have memory, if anyone on this call has memory of the global financial crisis of 2008 to 2010, some countries had a real boom and bust property effect, and prices have been booming, certainly around Europe and the States. But then there was a big correction, a big decline in prices. And a lot of that was linked, of course, to mortgages and the financial crisis was triggered by that, the sale of securitized mortgages. Whereas in Italy, the mortgage market is actually not a significant part of the buying process. Most Italians don't like mortgages. They don't have mortgages. I think it's only 20 to 30% of property owners actually have mortgages in Italy. So the banks and the system is not as exposed to borrowings on property. So it tends to have stayed fairly flat over a long period of time. And prices did correct. They did fall in Italy after the financial crisis, however, and they haven't really recovered across the country. In some cities have grown, particularly over the last 3 or 4 years, particularly cities like Milan and Bologna. However, across the board, they've been relatively depressed. And so I think this crisis on the back of that hasn't necessarily meant that another fall or because prices, in my opinion, have been depressed and very reasonable comparatively across Europe already. So you could argue there's not too far to fall. And also I think the Italian culture is such that people often have plenty of time to sell. And if they think it's not the right time or they're not ready, then they'll just take it off the market rather than drop the price and put it back on the market maybe a year later when they think it's a better time. So I think you're seeing a bit of that. And I also think on the demand side, there's some pent up demand. There's some demand from people that have been wanting to come to Italy, wanting to buy, and they haven't been able to do that for 12 months. So I think if we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel with COVID, as it opens up, there's going to be increased demand, I think.
Okay, fantastic. Now I've just been copying down all the questions because we've actually run out of time.
Okay.
But what I'm going to do, if you'll excuse me while I look at my screen and copy and paste all these questions, because we have other sessions coming up the rest of the day, including another Italian session at 11:25. We have, however, run out of time for this session. So thank you very much, Daniel. And you'll be on the booth all afternoon, I guess.
Yes.
So
yes,
they can come to you for all their questions and get in touch with you in all the different ways. And so if you haven't had your question answered, or you still got a few queries, then do please contact Daniel directly. Thank you very much for attending, everyone. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, everybody.